Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When the interim deal was announced in November, it was timed in an interesting way. It was the same weekend where America was commemorating the 50th anniversary of the death of President Kennedy. And I was with many of my colleagues at a security conference in Nova Scotia when the deal was announced. And a great speech of Senator Kennedy's was running through many of our minds that weekend as television was discussing his career. It was the graduation speech he gave at American University a few months before he died in the spring of 1963. He had started aggressive diplomatic efforts to try to reduce nuclear weapons and the nuclear competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. And he was heavily criticized as naive, foolish, a dupe, etc., for doing that. And he made a very aggressive case for the fact that part of American strength is strong diplomacy. And one of the phrases that he used in that speech, and I would recommend the speech to anyone because it is a very interesting one that reads as if it was written today, is that with all appropriate skepticism, and this is a direct quote, we can still reduce tension without relaxing our guard. Aggressive diplomacy is needed to reduce tension, and aggressive diplomacy is needed to solve thorny problems, but we don't have to relax our guard. And I see what we are trying to do with Iran in that spirit. We all want exactly the same thing. We want Iran not to have nuclear weapons. We all will prefer if we can get to that end diplomatically rather than having to use military force. As a member of this committee, I recently cast a vote to use military force to enforce what I thought was a very important international norm. Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, and I will cast a vote to use military force should that be necessary. But everyone in this body, every one of our allies, every one of the P5, everyone throughout the world would desire, if there is a diplomatic alternative, a diplomatic path to a non-nuclear Iran, that we pursue that path, whatever the chances of success, that we pursue that path. While we both want these things, a non-nuclear Iran and a preferred diplomatic resolution to this thorny question rather than a military one, we have differences in tactics. And that's to be understood, and they're good faith differences. They're good faith differences. We're debating about a current piece of legislation, and some in this body support it and some don't in terms of the timing. Those who support it are not pro-war. Those who oppose it are not soft on Iran or anti-Israel. We have a difference in tactic about what is the right way to attain a diplomatic solution to a very thorny problem, the diplomatic solution that is the preferred solution. I'm very clear-eyed about the Iranian threat, not only the nuclear threat and not only the history of past events, but current events. Human rights violations have been mentioned, and a history of and current practices that are bellicose and destabilizing of other governments in the region and beyond. And it is the case that the sanctions that Congress has put in place, and so many, I have not been part of that legislation. I came here after the legislation was passed, but I can praise those who have been here for putting tough sanctions in place. The vote in 2011 was 100-0 in this body, and the administration has been able to utilize sanctions to bring Iran to the table because it has crippled their economy and isolated them in the international community. But the sanctions are not enough to stop an Iranian nuclear program. And the one thing that I think you would say if you looked at the history is that the sanctions has crippled the economy, but if anything, it has also, by making Iran isolated, accelerated their path to try to develop nuclear technology for whatever purpose. And so if we're going to stop that nuclear program and that quest for nuclear weapons, we have to either do it diplomatically or do it militarily. I support the sanctions, and I'll easily and gladly vote for more if we cannot find an agreement. And I have some ideas about additional ones I want to raise either with this panel or the second one. But I do think that this joint plan of action and the diplomatic efforts of the administration give us an historic opportunity that we can't afford to put a crosswind into the middle of. The joint plan of action and the interim agreement, in my view, from analyzing it and reading analysis done by many who are much smarter about me on this, slows and even reverses aspects, not all aspects, but critical aspects of the Iranian nuclear program, which sanctions alone has not been able to do. And it also provides this country and our partners and all of our allies and the entire world a better early warning system about whether Iran is cheating. We get more time in the clock and a better early warning system because of this deal. We have to give diplomacy a chance. We have to. I think aggressive diplomacy has been an under-exercised American muscle in the last 15 years. We have to return to the kind of aggressive diplomacy that the nation embraced when President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, brokered the end of the Russo-Japanese War, won a Nobel Peace Prize for doing so. Since that time, our strength has been measured not just by our military strength, not just by our economic strength, but the strength of our moral example and the strength of our diplomatic effort. And we can be appropriately skeptical. The President has been very candid in talking to all of us that it's maybe 50-50 or whether we will find a deal that we would think would be sufficient. And if we don't, of course, there will be greater sanctions that we will put in place and that we'll support. But we've got to give diplomacy a chance, not only in this instance, but we've got to return to the tradition of aggressive American diplomacy that has been one of the very core elements of our power in the world. It has been under-exercised, and I'm glad to see we're getting back to it. And last thing I'll say, just quickly, if there may be a day when this deal doesn't work that we do have to contemplate military action to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I don't think it's that hard to contemplate that we might be at that day at some point in the future. And as I've said, I'll state on the record right now, if there is no other way to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon than for us to engage in military action, hopefully with others, I'm going to vote yes on that. But in order for us to vote yes on that, we have got to be able to look our allies and our citizens, and especially the men and women that we would ask to fight that battle, we would have to be able to look them in the eye and tell them that we had exhausted every diplomatic effort prior to undertaking that significant step. We may have to undertake that significant step, but we shouldn't do it if we leave diplomatic avenues unexplored. Let's make this negotiation about Iran's good faith. Let's not make it about our good faith. Let's demonstrate our good faith and put them to the test of whether they're serious about ending their nuclear weapons program.